So when we say or we hear that we don't know how long in terms of the side effects, what sort of research do we need in terms of that?
Well, you need long-term monitoring. So not just when people are taking the medications, but what happens in the next 6 or 12 months. And one of the conditions of the TGA licensing is long-term monitoring, that whoever gets these substances, the doctor who prescribes or the clinic who provides it, will be responsible for reporting to the TGA what actually happens. And that, again, is a very welcome development. We have not done enough of that in Australia. We do have clinical trials that are doing it, but when this happens in prescriptions outside of clinical trials, we simply need to know, not just is there short-term benefit, but is there any long-term harm?
And Professor, we talk about depression and also PTSD. Why are these particular conditions looked at, and why do you think current medication is not working for some?
Well, we know in the depression area, for example, about 2/3 of people do respond well to a lot of the available treatments. But for those with more severe depression, it's then very unclear what other treatments work, and many, for some proportion, don't work. So supporting research into new treatments and treatments that have been reported to have effects is very welcome. And to the credit of the previous government, they did support new clinical trials in this area. And this is actually part of ongoing research. So that's good to see. Same with post-traumatic stress. We know there's a series of people who've had really bad experiences whose lives continue to be significantly disabled. Another area where the current therapeutics have had their limitations. So these are two areas of great disability, in some cases obviously life-threatening in terms of suicide and premature death, where we need to look at new therapeutics. But we need to do it in well-controlled and well-evaluated situations, and not simply have new treatments be out there because they're popularised, because there's a lot of hype, because there's an appealing to a market, and we don't really know about unintended harm. So I think this is a smart move by the TGA to try and get ahead of that, but say, you know what, we're going to be careful, and we're going to go for careful prescribing. Doctors we can trust, clinics we can trust, who will carefully evaluate who gets the treatment and what is the outcome.
And Professor, do you think they'll look at other types of mental health conditions? I know you talk a lot in your recent book on things like addiction and so forth. Will they perhaps be looking at other mental health conditions?
Yes, so the expert committee that gave advice here looked at the small number of trials, and I must say it's still a very small number that are out there on two common conditions, PTSD and treatment-resistant depression. But there are other trials recently reported in alcohol-related conditions and in other addictive conditions. So I think as new evidence emerges, we're then likely to see a consideration of whether there are other areas where these two substances could be used. But really, what we need is some reasonable evidence from clinical trials before moving to more open prescribing. But those are other areas, particularly those in the addiction area, the alcohol misuse area, where it's likely to be that this will be further evaluated.
And has this approval been brought forward?
Well, it was delayed last year, and I'm a bit surprised that it has gone ahead, because the decision last December was a very conservative one to not change the regulation. So I think what's happened is there's a good deal of public pressure, there's been a good deal of media and public interest, there's a good deal of lobbying going on by those who have interests in the area. But unfortunately, there's also a good deal of backyard prescribing and promotion going on that's probably putting people at risk. So I think what's happened here is the government, through its agencies, has tried to get ahead of the curve. It's tried to say, okay, look, this is out there. There are people who need help, but we need to do it in a reasonable, regulated way. So I think this actual decision has been brought forward, partly because it was delayed last year. And that reflects, I think, the appropriate balancing of public need against the need to also try and ensure long-term safety.
All right, well, we look forward to hearing more. Thank you so much for your time and expertise, Professor Ian Hickie.
Thanks for your interest.